how are you? So this is some teacher CPD on retrieval practice in lessons. It's Quincy, by the way. So, split into 3 sections: why use retrieval, how to implement, and what are some examples. So, why use retrieval? So retrieval practice is a strategy of regularly reviewing teaching for the purpose of improving recall times and accuracy, enhancing and correcting prior knowledge, freeing memory capacity by making the skills and topics automatic and second nature. So this is something I'm sure everyone does at some point in some time. I'm sure you've all done starters, recapping previous lessons and things like that, or activities where you are going back. I suppose the difference is a lot of people use it for revision at the end of the unit, whereas retrieval practice is about making it a daily habit and having it in every single one of your classes essentially. So why do that? Why have it in every single class, every single lesson, as opposed to just at the end of the unit as a revision exercises? So, case study. In one school, retrieval practice was implemented as daily practice for some classes to see if there would be any improvement in learning and results. Certain teachers were trained to deliver 8 minutes every day on review. So retrieval practice essentially. Teachers would check student prep, go over problems when there were errors, and practice the concepts and skills that needed to be practiced until they became automatic. So at the beginning of every lesson there'd be some sort of retrieval practice exercise, whether it was make a mind map of everything you've learned, what was the most important thing you learnt, flashcards, retrieval kind of grids, which I'll show at the end. So that was done every single lesson. The result. As a result, students who received regular retrieval practice exercises had significantly higher achievement scores than students in other classrooms. It was between 20 to 50% higher. They had 72% less anxiety as they became used to the process of retrieval. They became more comfortable with course content and less anxious about upcoming exams. So it's much the same way. If you do more of something, then you're less anxious when you have to do the real thing, just like a driving test or anything like that. Also, interestingly, they covered more content, as daily practice and overlearning had allowed students to complete activities quicker. So essentially, if, say, for example, if it was mathematics, they just learnt to do equations quicker. Or if it was comprehension, I know like in religious studies, there's a lot of comprehension and analysis in religious studies, and recall to keywords. If they just have that keyword at the top of their mind, or that key sentence like love your neighbour, because they already know it automatically, they can just apply it quicker. And that means memory capacity was freed, allowing for more information to be learned. So this is something that's not just used in education. I've seen it used in lots of different things. It's pretty much a standard part of kind of business training. I know when I worked in a bank, they used it a lot as well to help us remember statistics and things like that. So, moving on. How should teachers frame and implement retrieval practice? So we looked at the why. According to data, it's pretty much a dead cert that if you use it in your lessons, your students will get better grades and they'll be better learners. So how to use it? So the first thing is how you frame it. So frame the retrieval practice around a prior experience or lesson. Students need to think back to a prior time when they learned information to reconstruct the information. This imagery of an event will improve the success of the retrieval, as opposed to linking it to information that is learnt passively. So a lot of retrieval practice is based on neuroscience, and basic neuroscience is that if something is connected to an event, it's a bit more visceral, isn't it? So if you think about the things you remember, like your birthday, etc., etc., and it's the same way. If you try to tie the retrieval practice around a certain activity that you did, it's a lot more likely to be remembered if you do that, as opposed to you tie it to just some kind of passive learning, some passive exercise. They're a lot less likely. So I do a lot of retrieval practice, and I usually tie it to a video that I've shown the kids, or when we did some kind of role play. Like when we did a lesson and we married, who did we marry? I think we married Sam off to Suzanne in year 10. So they all remember rites of passage whenever I do that retrieval practice. Anyway, moving on. Second thing, you need to balance the retrieval, difficulty and success. So retrieval shouldn't be so difficult that students can't retrieve anything, but you don't want it to be too easy either, because otherwise then you're not really drawing out kind of key information. So if retrieval success is below 50%, then providing visual or audible scaffolding and prompts to help the students will be more effective. So again, if you're doing retrieval practice and the students are getting everything right, that doesn't necessarily mean that was good retrieval practice. You want it to really stretch them. And this is good because, again, you're getting away from this kind of right and wrong answers. It's not about right or wrong answers. It's about improving the person as a learner. So, when to do... Oh, sorry, just turn my computer off. When to do retrieval. So, just do it as much as possible. That's the key idea. So, putting retrieval at the beginning of a lesson can obviously and clearly help to frame a lesson and link prior knowledge to the learning in hand. So it's very good as a starter. What was the most important thing you learned last lesson? Or what was the least important thing you learned last lesson? That's quite a good one to help them think. However, looking at long-term learning in a set of 3 studies that were done, they showed there was no real difference between lessons where students were quizzed throughout the lesson or at the end of the lesson. The main thing was when they compared it to students who did no retrieval at all, again, it was 20 to 50%, sometimes even worse. How the students did in long-term tests. So the most important thing is just do retrieval as much as possible. Try and do it at least every lesson. It's a real game changer. Don't just do it at the end of the unit. So we've looked at the why, we've looked at the how. Now let's look at the what. So there's lots of things you could do. Again, I'm not going to teach you to suck eggs. I'm sure lots of you know lots of effective retrieval practice things. You only have to look on tests or anything at all, just Google it and it'll come up with 1,000 things. But one thing I've used that always works very well is a retrieval practice challenge grid. It's very effective because you can make it differentiated. So this is an example of a history one. You see something to remembering things from last lesson is 1 point, but remembering things from 4 lessons ago is 4 points. So it can be differentiated. So students who are a bit more able can do the 4 lessons ago one. It can be gamified, so you can say there's 4 points for 4 lessons ago, 1 point for 1 lesson ago. And then you can say, but everyone needs to get 4 points. So even if you're going to go for the easier ones, then you need to perhaps do more of the easier ones. It works well in group tasks, so you can put less able people with more able people, or you can just put all the more able people on one table and say, you have to do this, and then you can spend more of your time with the less able people. I know that was a big thing when I worked in the public sector. But obviously, as we've got a lot smaller classes, you don't necessarily have to do that. You can spend more time with every single student. And yeah, I think I've put differentiated twice there. Differentiated for ability. Yeah, moving on. So, and then lastly, here's some examples for, you can just get students to do themselves. So here's 4 examples of retrieval. Maybe as a plenary, you could say to students, pick whichever one you want to do. It's quite nice because, again, just gives them a bit of autonomy. Perhaps they can do the one that makes the most sense to them. So put away all your class materials, create a sketch of everything you know. That way the students can check each other's work. But most importantly, I think as well, is that you check their work for accuracy, because that's the whole point, because they might have, the amount of times you say something. And again, it's not just even in teaching. I remember going back to my days outside of teaching, you could explain something to someone and then you ask them to explain it back to you. They heard something completely different, Chinese whispers. So it's so important that you actually check the retrieval that the students did. So say you ask them to do a mind map, check the mind map. Also, not only students should just recall words and definitions, that's kind of the first stage, but then get them to make links. So there's a completely another kind of CPD type thing called solar learning, but that's a different slide for a different day. But basically, it's about making links. That's a massive thing with retrieval. So maybe get them to get keywords, but then get them to write lines off the keywords, and along the lines, they have to write what links each other. So that's taking it another step. So they have to not just remember things, but make links between things, and then you can examine how they're linking things. Especially nowadays for the higher 7, 8 and 9 GCSEs, it's all about making links to get those higher grades. Obviously, again, you can make flashcards, and then again, it's about going beyond definitions, think about links between the flashcards, and then about practice tests. Hey, get the kids to make tests themselves, and then if 10 kids make 10 tests, then you've got 10 tests, and they can swap in between each other. Maybe over the course of the next 5 lessons, we can all do one of the tests that the kids do. But I know we do that a lot with a lot of our online testing. We do that very well anyway. So there you go, guys. The why, how, and what of retrieval practice. I hope that was happy. I hope that was helpful. But I know a lot of us, I should say, are doing it already. It's just about perhaps doing it every lesson, as opposed to at the end of a unit, to get that extra 10, 20, 30% in our students' learning and their results and exam grades. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Have a great, great, great day, week.